Welcome, everyone, to the League of Women Voters Empowering You series. This program is designed by the League of Women Voters in partnership with Dayton Access Television to provide unbiased, nonpartisan information on issues that are relevant to our friends and neighbors throughout the greater Dayton area. The League of Women Voters mission focuses as much on education as it does on voting rights, and the League has various positions on government, social policy, and natural resources. Today, we focus on social policy. My name is David Botery. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters and your host as we learn and discuss difficult conversations in our democracy. Our guests today are Dr. Austin Kaiser. He's an assistant professor at Sinclair, a colleague of mine, and Erin Prim. Erin is Mediation Response Unit Coordinator at the Dayton Mediation Center. Thank you both for sharing your time with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I'm looking forward to the conversation. It will be civil, but also I hope we're going to learn how to keep even difficult conversations civil in that sense. Together, I hope we can learn more about what makes some conversations difficult and how we might make those conversations more productive, less problematic. But Austin, if we could start with you. You recently completed a dissertation, and in that dissertation, you were investigating a bit of politics and sometimes even some difficult conversations.
Yeah, so my dissertation was really focused on distrust in government. And it was interesting because what started out with my hypothesis being that there was this distrust in the institution because of lack of transparency really kind of led me into another area of future research, which is maybe the issue is not the institutions, maybe it's that we don't trust each other, right? Now, I was having a conversation with my dissertation committee after I passed, and one of the committee members said, "It sounds like you're more of a sociologist now than a public administration or policy PhD." And I responded back with this idea that isn't all politics sociology, isn't how we interact with each other, a democracy of the people, for the people, and by the people, where we have to be active members. It's sociology. So I think this is an important topic, and I've discussed it with you and a number of others.
And so you bring this up in just a couple weeks, in fact, just a week. Joan Donovan, a professor from Boston University, will be the keynote speaker at the League of Women Voters Dangerous Dames event. So depending on when this airs, it will either be upcoming or past. But Joan Donovan is a sociologist by training, but now she's working in essentially emerging media technologies and really looking at misinformation and disinformation specifically related to government. So this is a fascinating area, and of course I think that everything has to do with communication, right? So whether it's public policy, whether it's sociology, whether it's communication, it's important to our democracy.
Yep.
So thank you for participating and being part of this conversation. As it relates to that though, Erin, you work for the City of Dayton in the mediation response team. Can you tell us a little bit about what's involved there?
Absolutely. It's a fascinating program that started back in 2022, as the Mediation Center itself has been around since 1987, 39 years now, 40 years next year. And so we started the Mediation Response Unit back in 2022 as programming behind the George Floyd incident, where many groups came together, and one of the things that was formulated was an alternative response. And so alternative response was birthed within the Mediation Center. And so since 2022, we responded to over 7,500 calls, over, I think it's 14,000 particular instances that are related to those calls. And the type of calls that we respond to are non-emergency, non-violent 911 calls. Things such as neighbor issues, roommate trouble, barking dogs, welfare checks, things of that nature. We go and respond to directly from the hours of 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday.
Okay. So think about the things that might happen, right? Oh, that neighbor is parking in my spot, right? I mean, those kinds of things where like you got to find ways to, in a neighborly way, work it out.
Well, that's correct. And thankfully, even before the advent of the response unit, the Mediation Center, as I said, we've been around 39 years. I personally been at the Mediation Center for 11 years. And so we had been conducting this type of support within the community, as I said, the entire time that we've been around. So with us responding directly to these 911 calls, this wasn't anything new. This just allowed us to get to those calls based upon the community calling 911 instead of calling us directly.
Right. And so my understanding is some communities have sort of worked with first responders with some level of a counseling or, in your case, a mediator, right? But other programs, other cities might have counselors or other kinds of social work sort of persons. So this is exciting. I didn't realize the Mediation Center was involved in those calls, so that's cool too.
Right.
And obviously you mentioned 14,000 calls that you could participate
Well,
in.
there's over 7,000 calls, but then there are actual interactions calling people,
okay.
Conversations. So those things, that accounts to over 14,000 actual interactions with individuals in regard to those calls.
So I'm excited to have both of you here because it really relates back to communication. And I think we're in this sort of difficult space where our politics are so divided. And it feels like social media has only made it worse, that rather than finding commonality, in some cases, I think the social media causes me to sort of it might even try to cause me to get my ire up, to be disgruntled or to find dissatisfaction in something somebody else posts. And so I think we're kind of getting into this place where people are distraught, maybe angry, and that's no way to then embark upon finding common ground. And of course, from my perspective, working and living in a democracy that is so different, right? Pluralistic in the sense that there are many different types of people and many different perspectives. That makes it tough for us to have these conversations. So I hope we can figure out some ideas of what we could do maybe better or different as we work in that direction. Yeah. Did you have a thought, Austin?
Well, this is, I was talking to Aaron before you got here, and I have this idea, and I think I spoke to you about it a little bit earlier, where after my dissertation, I read a couple books. One was How to Raise a Citizen by Lindsay Cormack, and that's my colleague that I'm working on a new project with. And this new project is looking at, we have this idea in our society, and I think it's rooted in good faith. It's rooted to be well-meaning, but I think, this is my hypothesis, that it has led us to exactly these problems. So my hypothesis, and on the first day of my classes, I start with, all right, I don't care what your mom and dad taught you. That old adage that you don't talk politics and you don't talk religion in my classroom, that gets thrown out the door because we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna have conversations. And what we see on social media, when you give students the freedom and say, I don't care if you're the biggest Donald Trump supporter or if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter in my class, and we're going to treat people with respect and we're going to have these conversations. When you open that door and give people a safe place where not only is it in person so they can't hide behind an alias or a fake profile picture where they have to look you in the eye and have a discussion with you, people have discussions, and there's times where it gets, we have these deep conversations, but it's always respectful. And these are young people, right? I was talking to Aaron about this, that we need to stop looking at the president or the governor or our political leaders for how to act. We need to look at each other, and that starts when you're young. My 2-year-old doesn't care who the president is or who the leader of these companies are. They think that I hung the moon. My son thinks that I am the most important person to him. So I need to set that standard, and I'm going to teach my kids how to talk politics with friends. I have a number of friends who I don't agree with politically, and we don't hide those disagreements. We talk about it.
Right.
You and I have done it at work, right? The taboo place that you're not supposed to talk, we've had conversations. Right. It's possible, but we don't expect Shohei Ohtani or a kid to pick up a baseball when he's 35 and go pitch in the majors. That's years of practice.
Good
and
point.
In order to be a productive member of our democracy, of our society, we need to teach kids from a young age how to have these conversations and start them in low-risk areas where their parents or loved ones are around, and teach them how to have these conversations before we enter this hyper-divisive environment.
Sure. And Aaron, from your perspective, are there some strategies or some techniques that you try to help people utilize in an effort to, well, first, maybe help them hear what the other person is saying, or second, right, not try to make it worse?
Right. There are several strategies. People have to first recognize that conflict of any nature, whether it's political or otherwise, is something that's natural. These things happen. But how is it that we exist as individuals within that conflict is a question, and every person needs to, or would probably be a good idea for them to figure this out prior to any conversation that they're going to have, especially one that can be as difficult sometimes as a political one.
Sure.
And so in that particular way, at the Mediation Center, we talk about conflict being a crisis in human interaction. And when this crisis occurs, then there's an opportunity to either react, which comes, as we would say, in mediator talk, from a place of weakness and self-absorption, a place where we're confused, discombobulated, or just generally thrown off by the circumstances. Oh, you say that you're affiliated with that whatever party, and just throws me off because I'm on the other side. And so when this happens, this weakness and self-absorption, we say, comes together, then it has an opportunity to destabilize us and put us in a place where we start to see the other person in a difficult way. We start to see them we become more defensive, we become more isolated, and then we may see them in an alienated way. And so once that happens, we may very well become reactive, as we say, and then this puts us in a bad spot. And
So defensive, then leading to reactive, and then perhaps unproductive in terms of resolving whatever our misunderstanding, disagreement, or conflict could be.
That's right, because generally speaking, when we're in the midst of conflict, it's very difficult for us to hear what the other person and hear, metaphorically, to see where they're coming from, because we're really not listening well at that point, because oftentimes we may have already made up our mind and they've come to us in a place where we're just totally thrown off. That's where the alienation comes from.
Gotcha.
And at that point, all bets are off. And if I can't hear you properly, then how can I engage in this conversation in what we would call a civil way?
Yeah, right. And of course, from a communication perspective, how can we then develop a shared understanding, right, of the issue or circumstance or situation? And whether that circumstance is political, like healthcare, which is, I suppose, controversial, but on another level, it's like, oh, but, right? We probably all feel like we need some of it. Or maybe taxation or more difficult kinds of things. I appreciate what you're sharing, and I think you suggested earlier to me that when conflict occurs, sometimes that can short circuit us. Can you talk more about that?
Yes, and so we were talking about with this weakness of self-absorption, that particular place makes it very difficult for us to really be able to relate to each other as humans. And in that particular way, this is where this short-circuiting can occur. And if we are not able to put some tools together, because this is your previous question, getting back to that, if we're not able to do things that will quote-unquote help us in these situations, if we haven't already captured that prior to these conversations, then we're going to be stuck in a really difficult place. And so there's some tools, as you were speaking to previously, that certainly we can employ. Number one, a personal inquisition, or looking inside of ourselves about what are our thoughts.
Self-reflection.
That's right. Where are we coming from with the thoughts that we believe? Because oftentimes, and let me just speak for myself.
Yeah.
I think that I'm right quite a bit about things, only to find out later, not so much. And so there are many situations where people may very well believe that they've got everything covered, and they don't do this personal inquisition or look inside themselves to find out, what, am I totally right about this, or is there any nuance? This is helpful for people to be able to do that.
Okay, so self-reflection.
Self-reflection is one.
What else?
Humility is also a big deal, because oftentimes we enter into conversations, we were like, oh, I know everything, I'm, perfection. You know, I've got everything going together here, going the direction it should be. The other person in the conversation, of course they're wrong for so many reasons. Oh, look at their political viewpoints. That's totally wrong. And these other things in our life, also aren't right. So perhaps we have this viewpoint. But if we're able to enter conversations with humility and not think that we are just everything in regard to this earth, then perhaps we can start to see other people's viewpoints, not necessarily agree,
Right.
but we can acknowledge where they're coming from.
Yeah, so I can appreciate they see it that way, although I might not necessarily see it entirely that way.
That's right.
But I make room for them to have their perspective.
That's right.
Yeah. Austin, did you want to add?
Yeah, this is something that I've also been thinking, and I've been really challenging myself to do this a little bit more. But we need to stop, looking at people through the political party lens. So, political parties become, seemingly hyper tribalized at some level. And I do have faith in this because young people are actually leaving political parties as a whole. Young people are very independent thinkers, and this is a good thing. But we need to stop looking at each other as, Republican versus Democrat and start really recognizing, Obama said this a handful of years ago, there's no red blue states and blue states, we're the United States. Stop looking at each other, to what you were saying as, oh, that person's a Republican, that person's a Democrat, and start looking, we're an American, right? This is who we are. And if we can find that common ground, then we can continue conversations a lot easier. I have friends in my program that I keep in touch with today. The first day I met her, I got out of that class and I talked to my wife. I said, I don't know about this girl. Like there's no way I'm going to end up liking her. She was at my wedding. I was at her wedding. We remained best of friends. We talk to each other almost every week, and we disagree on almost everything. But when we have these conversations through text message, we realized that person who I thought was going to be on this, this pole while I'm on this pole, we're right here.
Okay.
We're not that far apart. We just still have some disagreements, but we're really not that far apart. When we talk about divisiveness, I think the media has made it seem like we're more divided than we are. I don't think we're that divided. I think social media has amplified it. But really, once you get to that point where we can have common ground in person, like I was talking to you about earlier, in person is the key. Yeah. To have conversations in person, to join a club, to get involved someplace, to have those conversations.
Because when we know each other in a more personal way, then I don't sort of lump you into a category of other. And I, from a communication perspective, othering is a strategy. It's a technique that allows you to diminish that person's humanity. And there's lots of research on the use of othering, dehumanization or dehumanizing language. And we see it happening throughout the world. Depending on what part of the world you want to start with, we could pick it apart, right? And so that dehumanizing language does allow a person to then treat another human being as if they are less than.
Yes.
And so that doesn't help us. We have to find the commonality. And then when we do meet one another on a personal level, while I might not agree with everything you do, I know that you have a child, that you love your child, and that I love my child, and that we have that in common.
Yes,
What
and
else?
Dr. Bowdery, I'd like to interject that what we're talking about right now is also another help, another tool for these difficult conversations is rapport building. When we're able to build rapport, when we're actually able to sit together with each other and talk about things, as you found out, this othering becomes more difficult because you find yourself, as we would say, shifting mediator talk to a place where we're able to see each other in a more strong in a responsive way, and then we start humanizing each other. Instead of alienating, we begin to humanize. At the Mediation Center, we talk about building a bank of blue because we write these, this strength and responsiveness. We write these things in blue, these words, these emotions, and so we talk about building when I talk about a bank of blue, building a place of comfortability, of knowing, being able to recognize that this other person, as I said before, is a human, not just another person who does things so differently or not even a human at all. Right. No, there's someone who shares many commonalities with myself, And so in that particular way, when we're able to build rapport with each other, then the things that you're talking about, whether I disagree, the things I may disagree with, still falls into a place of, generally speaking, you're all right.
Right. I think about this as I think about different faith traditions too, because of course, while there are many different faiths, they all, almost all, will share that golden rule, right? To treat others as you would want to be treated yourself, whether that's the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, the Muslim tradition, all of them share that basic rule. So, like you say, we are more alike than we are dissimilar. So, all right, we've got a few minutes left. Are there things that we can do to improve our conversations from your perspective?
Oh, most definitely. We can start to think about, how we're having these conversations. As I said before, difficult conversations are something that people shouldn't just leap into, as the world may say, willy-nilly.
Right.
That we need to probably make some preparations before we enter into any difficult conversation, which also, as we could talk about this forever, it feels as if many conversations we have, political or not, are difficult. And so when it gets to these extremely difficult ones where we really have issues in those particular places, and so we need to start to train ourselves to one degree or another about the aspects of difficult conversations and how to do it. We were talking about today at the office, of course we were. Some of the things that we could do possibly is learn the things that we're not going to say.
Okay.
Taking into account to those things like, I'm going to talk to Austin and we're going to have this political conversation. I am not going to say certain things because it may trigger him.
Okay.
Okay?
Right.
I'm going to try to work on understanding what Austin's buttons are as well as what mine are, because I can become easily triggered as well. And so when I recognize my buttons are, if Austin happens to hit some of them, then I can start to get myself together in one way or another. I can become more strong and responsive.
Right.
Also, I can start to care about the other people that I'm talking to, and if I have built rapport with them, recognize what their buttons are and not seek to push those buttons in that particular way.
Right.
And this is something that I would kind of add to this is stop listening to respond, right? Stop listening to respond. This is what we do, I catch myself doing this sometimes too. But I go back to the last time I was on this show with you. Last time we talked about, letting that cup of coffee sit, right? And I use that metaphor to talk about how there's the filibuster and, Congress doesn't move fast enough. And sometimes letting that cup of coffee sit to cool down
Right.
is the right thing. And I use this in my classroom. So I say, who here has texted somebody? And the moment you hit that send button, you immediately regret it,
Yeah.
right? And that happens more than especially when I was young, it happened more times than I would like to admit. But here's the second thing that I'll add to this is, my first boss, when I first got involved in politics, told me this. And he said, there's one person in this world that agrees with you 100% of the time, and they look yourself in the mirror
Every
at that
day.
moment. And here's the reality that I've learned. Through the years, I've gotten to know my students, and I tell them, and I don't just say this, but I tell them, you're going to learn stuff from me, I hope, and I'm going to learn a lot from you guys too, because of how I set my classroom up. So when I look myself up in the mirror in the morning, I don't even agree with myself usually that afternoon. Something's changed. My
that's good.
Right.
life experience has changed.
Right.
So we need to be okay with that, but really understanding that it's okay to agree to disagree too. When we talk about civil dialogue, that doesn't mean that we need to end up and be like, yes, we're all on the same page and sing kumbaya with each other. What we need to do is say, it's okay. I understand where you're coming from now,
Yeah.
but I don't agree with it. And that's
Right.
okay.
And that's okay too. Right. So, Aaron, you said self-reflection. You said humility. And what I hear you saying, Austin, is that we really need to be, in a way, open or curious. Open to change, open to allowing ourselves to learn from another human being, and to be curious about, well, why would they think that way? And maybe if we can add those things to our lives, we can improve our ability to get along in a very diverse, sort of disparate world. What
Right.
else?
And then also, not taking things so personal. Oftentimes, and I think also we were talking about this previously as well, is that many times when we come into these conflictual spaces, someone says something, and automatically it's an affront to us personally, to Aaron. Oftentimes, this is not the case. This is not people's intention.
Right.
So let's perhaps not take ourselves as serious as if, you know what, I'm the ruler of the universe, but perhaps the other person has an opinion they're expressing, and it's not necessarily just going against everything that I am.
Right, I appreciate that. We've only got a couple minutes left. I want to give you a chance to add anything that you want to make sure we touch on before we draw things to a close.
Well, only that conversations can be difficult in all facets of our life, politically, certainly. As individuals, if we're able to take steps, we can actually get to the point where we're able to have these conversations in a more strong, responsive way. But it takes effort.
Right, and practice.
Absolutely.
And so it's okay to practice a conversation.
It is,
I
absolutely.
can recall even as a young man practicing conversations that weren't necessarily difficult, but I was awkward about them, right? I hadn't had conversations of some kinds in the past. So practicing that conversation might be useful.
Yes.
Yeah, and you know, as I've gotten into my research, what I'll end on is, you know, to the parents out there who are raising young kids, teach them to be involved in politics, teach them to be active members. And I know I'm preaching to the League of Women Voters here, but you know, get them involved. You know, take them to vote. I took my 2-year-old to vote, and it was the best experience. I want to share those experiences. My 2-year-old will grow up, I hope, to be an active member of our democracy, but I'm not going to change the world, but I can change the little sphere that I grow up in,
Right.
And that I'm raising kids in, and that, you know, this area, hopefully, I can change. I used to want to be governor or president, and that's not where I ultimately became. But where I think I can make a difference here is creating a more perfect union. Not by running for office, but by having conversations with people who grew up in different communities, and really urge people to become more involved and to become civically educated and civically engaged.
So well said, and aren't we all working toward that more perfect union? I want to thank our guest, Austin Kaiser, Assistant Professor at Sinclair, and Aaron Prim, Mediation Response Unit Coordinator for the Dayton Mediation Center. Thank you so much, too, to our viewers for staying informed, for being engaged. And until next time, let's keep empowering one another. Let's keep building that more perfect union, strengthening our democracy. The League of Women Voters encourages everyone to be activist citizens in our community. This includes being educated about government and social policy, as well as the environment, and by registering to vote and then actively voting, not just occasionally, but every election. Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not something we should watch and chuckle about. It's something that we need to be actively engaged in. So if you need help registering to vote, learning how to vote, or have ideas for upcoming programs you'd like to see me be involved in, please contact the League. Our email is league@lwvdayton.org, or you can call the office. The number there is 937-228-4041. Thank you.